Unleash the power of your training. Welcome to Tortal's 4D process. Define, design, develop, and deploy. Here is your host, Matt and Adria.
So you are in a presentation about Tortal's 4D process, and I'm about to tell you what that is. So what is the 4D process? So essentially, this process is our development model that we have developed over many years of trial and error and finding what works best between us and our clients. And it's what we use to collaborate with our clients to discover and create their training solutions, whatever those may be. And it really helps streamline all of the steps. And especially since we follow this with each and every client, we've gotten much better at this over time. The reason we call it the 4D process is because it stands for 4 things: discovery, design, develop, and deploy. And throughout this session today, I'll be going through each step, and then Matt's going to handle some of those as well. And we're also going to ask for you to share some of your best practices, because just because this is our process doesn't mean it's the best process. And I'm sure you have some little nuggets of knowledge that could help everyone in the room as well. So we'd really love to hear from you. And I also invite you to share your audio and video if you'd like to come on screen with us. That would be perfectly fine. Don't be intimidated. We will not bite. At least I won't. I don't know about Matt. So we're going to start with the first D, which is our discovery process. So the discovery phase is really the launching point for any client that we work with. In it, we discuss the project with the client to determine what maturity level their content is and where gaps are, because that's what we're here to fill. The end result of this phase is a very high level course outline or course overview, similar to if you've ever written an essay and you typically start that with an outline or bullet points of what you're going to cover in each paragraph. That's usually what we walk away from the discovery phase with: a high-level outline, highlighting learning objectives, who our audience is, and what we're going to cover in the course and in what order. So we'll talk about that some more now. So at Tortal, we have the pleasure of working with an array of clients across all industries. So whether you're operating a car wash, whether you are running a martial arts school, or creating technical product training for heavy trucking, we've worked on solutions for all of those types of businesses. From a bird's eye view, we can usually categorize the client's content into 3 basic buckets. Either they have content that's very mature and complete, like a manual that's already written and they already have a process or a workflow. Partial or incomplete, so they kind of have some of it written down and there's a policy or 2, but there are gaps. And ones that are looking to us to create that process or the content. And maybe the content is in someone's head, so there maybe is a process, but it's not written down anywhere. And I would just like to add, all of these buckets are perfectly acceptable, and we've worked with all of them. So if you find yourself in 1, 2, or 3, all of those are perfectly fine. One is not better than the other. That's what the discovery phase is for, to figure out where the client is, right? So after determining the maturity level of the content and identifying whatever gaps may exist, that's when we schedule time with our subject matter experts, which we like to call SMEs. I'm sure you guys have heard that word before, or the acronym before. And essentially we conduct an interview with these SMEs, which is what this handsome dude on the screen is doing. He's in a SME interview, and he's rigorously taking notes as they're all sharing their knowledge with him about whatever amazing course I'm sure he's building. And so during this interview, I do want to share with you guys some of our go-to questions. Now, of course, there are some times where we get really, really granular and ask very specific questions, but these are some general ones that help us get a really good idea of where we might need to ask more detailed questions. So one of the first questions I always ask, and I really need to know this to be able to build the course appropriately, is who is the audience? Who is my learner? Who's going to be taking this course? Is it a new employee, or maybe a new manager or director, a new member to your organization? Knowing who the learner is going to help drive the content in the right direction, and and allows us to tailor the information for that audience. So for an example, if we're building a training for a brand new cashier, and most of the people who get this job are teenagers and it's maybe their first summer job, that content is going to be created for that audience. But if the content is being created for a director level position, and usually the learner is a very seasoned entrepreneur with lots of business experience, the language and the level that we build that course at will not be the same. I hope that makes sense. So another question that we definitely need to identify and ask while we're in that SME interview is, what knowledge do you want the learner to walk away with? What do they need to know when they leave this training? What should they be able to do? What kind of conversations do they need to be able to have? Do they need to be able to execute complicated sales techniques, balance a ledger, operate a cash register, bag groceries appropriately, cook fried chicken without burning it? It really just depends. So that's how we identify our learning objectives down the road. And also another one, do we need to schedule any demos, whether that be virtual through Zoom or any other platform, or in person? We do have a lot of clients that are local. And so scheduling a demo is always a plus if that's something that we need to do. And I would say the last one, that's kind of a general question or something that comes up in every SME interview that we have to tackle early, is, does the content need any additional approval cycles? Do we need to loop in any other parties into our process? Like, does legal need to be involved? Does marketing need to be involved? Do we need to loop in HR or any other departments, or maybe C-suite? Knowing that early is really going to help us, because the last thing we want is to get all the way to the very, very end of our process, delivering the content, and then legal comes in. Sorry, you should have checked with us. This has to change. Or Matt, the example you gave earlier was like, the messaging is great, but marketing says, well, that's really off-brand with the message we're sending. So we have to go back and tweak. So the sooner we know that, the better. So that is our discovery phase. So before we move on to the next one, I would love to hear from anybody in the room, maybe what one of your best practices is in the discovery phase, or with working with SMEs.
Yeah, and Adria, why don't I start with best practice? And I kind of took this from you, just recording the SME meetings or interviews or whatever it is. The ability to go back and look at something you might have missed. Not only does it save time not needing to take notes in real time, but being able to go back and dissect that content is valuable beyond that.
Yes. Yeah, for sure. And I can't tell you how many times before I started recording my SME meetings, how many times I had difficulties like deciphering my notes, or remembering, I wrote this down, but now I don't know who said it and I have additional questions. Because sometimes you have 3 SMEs on a call and I can't remember who made that comment. And now I need more details or more information. And, I don't want to look unprofessional and saying, well, who made this comment? I need more information. So yeah, recording SME meetings is an absolute best practice that I follow.
And Adria, I don't see anything in chat, so why don't we move on to the next step?
But yeah, great.
Folks, please feel free to type anything that you do in your discovery phase for anything you build, and we'll look at it as soon as possible.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. So did my slide change on your screen? Perfect. So our next phase in the 4D process is the design. In the design phase, this is where we detail the content using a document that, appropriately so, we call the detailed design document. Or if your company is like ours, we love acronyms. So this is the DDD. Find it kind of confusing because we already have a 4D process, and this is the DDD. I guess we just really like that letter. Anyways, well, Matt, since you're the only one on screen, I'm going to ask you, raise your hand or in the chat, anyone's able to chime in, if you've ever seen a storyboard. Oh, Matt, you've seen one. Okay, another question. Raise your hand. Oh, Lance says yes. Raise your hand if you've ever, and Cassidy says yes. Raise your hand if you've ever seen just a training script. So not a storyboard, just a script. Oh, I got 2 thumbs up from Matt. Okay, Cassidy and Lance said yes. Perfect. So the DDD is like a perfect medley or marriage of both. Now, this is just a very small snippet of our DDD for one little interaction of one short e-learning course, but I've had DDDs that are as long as, 15 or 16 pages. It really just depends on how long the course is, what type of course it is, how complicated the content is, but the structure doesn't change. So what we're focusing on the most in the DDD is getting the story on paper that we want the learners to hear. And that's also what we want the client to focus on when they're reviewing the DDD. Because after we complete this, we're going to send it to the client to have it, gone through with a fine tooth comb, edited, reviewed, approved, all of that good stuff. So let me just kind of take you through this. And again, this is usually very, very long, but this is just one little snapshot. So on the far left, where you see topic/content, this is the script. So this is what either your characters are saying, your narrator is saying. Essentially, this will translate to whatever audio eventually will be recorded. And so this is what the learner will hear. And so like, for example, it says, and this sounds like the narrator, it says, now let us review the policy through a brief scenario. Winston is a relatively new member to the organization. He joined a local chapter roughly 4 months ago, owns his own business, blah, blah, blah. Since joining, he struggles to arrive on time, which are held on Wednesdays, 7 a.m. How should Patricia, the VP of membership, who helped onboard Winston, handle this situation? And then it goes on and gives a couple of options. And so that's what the narrator will be saying. The next column where it says the design or treatment, these are our initial thoughts about what we want on screen, what we want on stage, what we want the learner to see as these words are being spoken. So we would like to create an animated scenario where Winston, in business professional attire, who's in front of maybe his business with supporting text on screen. And it even says a development note, animate an alarm clock ringing, to reiterate the text of he has a really hard time getting up for this 7 a.m. meeting. And so, it goes on and on about what we want to see on screen. But again, when we send this to the client, we really, of course, we want them to review all of it, but their main focus is the script. This is the story we're telling. Did we get the story right? That's what we want to make sure we're doing. And then on the far right is the duration. And again, this is just an estimate because until we build it and time it out, that is just a very, 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 it's about as good as we can estimate as to how long we think the interaction will take. But until it's completely scripted and all edits are made and we actually have the audio recorded, we won't have an exact time. Okay, so any questions about that so far? Please feel free to throw them in the chat. Also, if anybody would like to come on screen, you can definitely do that now, and also share in the chat if you have any best practices on your design process. Because again, this is what we do with our DDD, whether we're doing an e-learning, whether we're doing an instructor-led or virtual instructor-led. This is our document where we plan all that, but we would love to hear from you. What do you guys do?
Yeah, and please go ahead and toss any of that in chat, and we will be able to respond back. Adrian, why don't I take over? We have 12 minutes left, so
perfect.
I'll be able to jump through this for everyone.
Awesome.
Yeah, so after the design step, you have the develop step. This is where all the magic happens, where the DDD comes to life. The software that we use to develop said training will be dependent on what is appropriate. As an example, we develop in Rise, Storyline, Camtasia, beyond, and possibly sometimes blending those solutions together. But if it's VILT or just-in-time training or job aids, we might use something from the Adobe suite or Microsoft Office suite like Word or Acrobat. Since we build everything from mock simulation trainings to job aids, often our projects will be kind of a comprehensive solution, even for singular things. So as an example, this e-learning course that we see on screen, that actually also had some job aids associated with it, which were made in PDF. And I can't remember if we did it for this, but we might have also had ILT that was associated. One of the best practices I can say around the develop phase that our team is kind of trial and errored into is kind of parsing out different parts of this training to play to all of our team's strengths. So as an example, my expertise tends to be in building the assets in the actual e-learning software. Adria is really great at putting together, PDFs and ILTs. She's the queen of building ILTs and participant guides and all of that. But this really helped us streamline quicker turnaround cycles, which at the end of the day is the most important thing for anyone who needs content. So since we've already done the design phase and it was focused on making sure that we had, the story right, the content correct, and the clients have already seen it and they reviewed it, edited, and confirmed it. Now, us as developers in this phase, we can really focus on putting together, all the supporting visuals and the interactions that we kind of referenced in the DDD. It's really important that you do all that in the design phase, because then we can focus on, adding more oomph to all of the training, which again, that's something that people really want. As an example, in this screen, you can see the top two sections of this e-learning course. While it's a still image there, all those assets, the building animated in, Winston came in from the right of the screen, the bubble popped up, Z's were floating above his head. And yes, we did end up doing the alarm clock kind of ringing, just to all add to the story. Ultimately, it all speaks to kind of consolidating and expediting the review phases. For us, we've been able to get it down to basically two primary phases. One is the alpha phase and one is the beta phase. The alpha phase is where we kind of fine tune any of the spoken audio that maybe we didn't catch in the DDD. Everything is a little different when you can actually hear it. Makes sense. We also incorporate any of those visual assets or edits that a client might ask for. Maybe they want Winston wearing a red hat, or maybe they want his electrician company to be something different. It's easier just on all of the visual stuff, because that's where all the edits and everything kind of go into. After the alpha phase review is done, we send it out to get audio recorded, and that goes into the beta phase, which is where, now that the design phase is confirmed the story that we wanted, the develop phase is confirmed in the alpha review all the visuals we want. Now, really, in the beta phase, all they're doing is making sure that all the audio is recorded right, that they're saying the things that, pronouncing things the way they should be pronounced, and that we completed all the edits that they wanted. And, again, this all speaks to expediting content going through the development phase and the design phase, so we can get it out quicker to, whoever our client is, or internal projects. If you have anything that you do as a best practice, and when you're developing, and it doesn't matter if it's an e-learning, ILT, or job aids, anything like that, we'd love to hear about it in chat, because we always love learning more. For the sake of time, I am going to jump to the next step, though.
I'll just add too, just for the sake of saving time and money on everyone's part, in case we didn't kind of communicate this enough already. Every single phase that we're talking about here has an approval. So when we create the course outline, that's another meeting and an approval with the client. When we create the DDD, that's a meeting, and typically we give the client several days to, review that and share with other parties if need be, and then approve that as well. Because the last thing we want to do is get all the way here after the course has been fully developed and we've put in, countless hours into making, like in this course, ended up looking like a movie, right? Because there was so much animation. Um, the last thing we want to do here is have the client come back and say, you know what? I feel like we should have done a plumber instead of an electrician. And instead of Winston always being late, let's say he has a problem with, respecting other members of the organization. And if that were to happen, of course, we would be able to fix it. But all the work we put into building this animation and writing out the scenario, has basically gone to waste. Um, so every single phase that Matt's talking about here and that we've discussed so far, everything has an approval before we move on and invest more time.
100%. Catching any of those things that you want to change as close to the step where you develop them or design them or outline them is a cost saver down the line. Because, so for our company, if someone were to do that, we would have to charge them. It is what it is. We have to charge for hours on rework. If your internal company training department, that's extra days that you have to go back and rebuild that content on stuff that could have been caught. So having those review cycles at the end of each of these phases is critical. So that, or the final D in the process, is the deploy phase. Oh, chair sliding. It's exactly that. It's our deliverables vary from client to client, but what doesn't change is executing on those deliverables. You need to go above and beyond, or at least, hit that satisfaction that they're expecting. Ultimately, a lot of that comes down to quick turnaround. Did they get the content that they wanted? And did they get it quickly? With little delay, to ensure that there's as little delay as possible, some of the questions, so these are best practices, some of the questions that we consider before we even finish our content, normally we're actually thinking about it early on in these phases, so what are all the outputs getting spec'd to the way that they want? As an example, for e-learning courses, are they being published out in SCORM 1.2 or earlier versions? Is the navigation restricted? For job aids, that might be what format are they going to be in? Is it PDF so it's locked down and they can't edit, or Word so their franchisees can edit it? What format or video is going to be in? You want to have all those answered as early as possible. That way that doesn't pop up at the end after you've finished everything and hold up the process. To also speak to that, no matter what you're working with, whether it's a job aid or e-learning or video, have all those deliverables internally tested before you launch it company-wide or give it to the client, because one of the worst things you can have happen is not catching a critical error, and that goes company-wide, or you hand it off to a client and then they have to come back and you have to eat crow. It's always internally test it before delivering it or launching it. We also have an LMS. Tortal Training has an LMS. So another thing we have to consider is, did all the setup happen that needed to happen? Are all the course descriptions up there? Is it already built into the curriculum, or do we have that on the back end? So once we have the content, we can just make it live. You don't want that to hold up the process, especially if it's something critical, compliance training or something that's needed yesterday, which often with training, it is. And another thing to consider, and this might be a little outside of e-learning, so applies more to instructor-led or virtual instructor-led. Is there any follow-up that needs to happen, or maybe longitudinal obligation after completing the product? You know, do you need to perform T3 training after it, or post-training surveys, you know, analytics, you know, make sure that you're hitting that ROI that you promised when you pitch this project. You know, has any new training been identified after launching this? You know, yeah, it was great. We taught them how to use the cash register. It turns out, you know, X, Y, and Z are also limiting them. You know, just those are some of the questions that you want to consider in the deploy phase. I do see that we're just at time. So let's wrap.
Yep. I'll just reiterate what you do, Matt. That follow-up is so important. You know, because training is really, I mean, it's great, but it's often viewed as like an event versus I'm teaching you a new behavior or a new skill. So follow-up will really help your learners to implement what they've been learning, not just, oh, I went to this really fun training once and now I'm just going to go back to my old habits. So
yeah, you always want to make sure that whatever solution you came up with is actually affecting change.
Yeah, for sure.